Hey guys, Tammy here, and this week we're going to talk about navigating a broken court system. I know that for a lot of us, the court does not always get it right. There's obviously a lot of problems with the system. It's obviously very overwhelmed with the volume of what it has to deal with. And it can just be really frustrating to be, sort of handcuffed by a system that you feel like isn't serving you. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit and try to give you some tips of how you can navigate this more efficiently given the circumstances that we're dealing with. So before we do, let me just remind you, if you like this content, find it helpful, don't forget to hit like on this video and also subscribe to the channel so that you get notified as new videos are released. So let's talk about the system. And I think one of the questions that I get a lot is around corruption. Like, is there corruption? Is everybody like in cahoots, so to speak? Like, the attorneys know the judges, judges know the attorneys, all the players know each other and all this kind of stuff. I get asked that question a lot. Now, I'm not going to tell you that there's no corruption in the entire system throughout the world or the US or whatever. That's obviously a very naive position. And obviously there's corruption in anything and everything at certain points, right? I mean, I'm sure there are places where it's corrupt or whatever. But I will tell you that I think that's pretty localized. I think that, I'm in California, which you would think that that's kind of one of the states more prone to that. I don't see much of that here. I know that I have been aware of some in kind of more the northern parts of the state. I'm not aware of any in the southern parts of the state. But, there's always things that go on behind closed doors. But I think for the most part, most people in the system they're trying to do their jobs. They're trying to do the right things. I think that when you get involved, particularly in family law, for most of us that work in family law, we've had some kind of personal experience around this. But I think for the most part, we're all kind of trying to do our job. And, it doesn't mean that people aren't, close colleagues, or we don't make friends in the industry or whatever. I think it's like any other job that you would have. Like, you have friends at work that you go hang out with, right? After work or whatever. I think that's not uncommon in the workplace. But that doesn't mean that the next day when you have to go into a meeting and maybe you have the opposite view on something as your friend, that, you don't do your job or you don't advocate for your position because, your friend has the opposite side or feels differently or whatever. So one of the things I think that's true is that we don't take these things personally. Like, attorneys go into court, they say all manner of things, they go against each other. I talk about my late husband, who was an attorney who passed almost 2 years ago now. And, there were colleagues that came to his memorial service that he had gone toe to toe with in trial. Those people didn't like hate him and not come to his service. Them and Thomas didn't have hurt feelings over whatever was said at trial either between the attorneys. It's like, it's a job, it's a job they have to do. And if we've personally been through it, you're passionate about it and you want to do well for your client and you want to advocate for parents and children because that's something that's close to your heart. You do have people that you become friends with in the context of this. Again, not to say that that means that you're then going to throw a case or not advocate. Thomas used to talk about all the time, like, I'm not, he's had clients ask this question, like, oh, you were so nice to the other attorney, or, you were joking around or whatever. And he's like, well, yeah, I see these people every day. This one person is somebody that kind of, built more of a relationship with, but that doesn't mean I'm willing to walk into court and like tank my whole reputation and not advocate for my client just because, I'm friends with somebody on the other side. So there's just a lot of things that go into the dynamics of all of this. Again, I'm not naive enough to believe that there's no corruption. Okay. I think that there are instances where you see that. I just don't think it's the whole of the situation for the most part. Okay. Assuming that we're not dealing with corruption and just assuming that we're just in this system where it's broken and it doesn't function all the time 100% accurately, right? People will ask me like, why, how can the court get it this wrong? Like, why does the court get it this wrong? Okay. And my first answer to that is always like, okay, we're human beings. Like judges are human beings, attorneys are human beings, child experts are human beings, and sometimes they make errors, right? And I'm not excusing that. I know that when we're going through this, like this is everything for us, right? This is our kids, this is our life. So when somebody else makes an error, it doesn't just feel like, "Oh yeah, you're human, you made a mistake." It's like, "What? How could you make a mistake? This is my entire life." I think that the court does get it wrong just simply out of error sometimes. But I think a lot of times that what's happening, especially in the very beginning, is not necessarily that the court is getting it wrong overall in like the long-term process. It's just that in the short term, the court goes, okay, we don't know what's going on. We're going to use like an abundance of caution, right? We're going to be super conservative in our decisions, and we're going to kind of like put everybody in their corners while we sort through what's happening. Again, that's difficult, right? If somebody files a DV against you and that's a false accusation, and now you're not seeing your kid for 3 months or whatever length of time it is, and you know you're not abusive and you know there's no reason that you shouldn't be seeing your child, that can feel like the system getting it wrong. But it's not that the system's getting it wrong. It's that this is the only way that they have to deal with that issue, which is to protect the child until they figure out if that parent has or hasn't been abusive in some way. And in a perfect world, we wouldn't do that. The problem is, this is the system that we've got. And unfortunately, nobody's been able to come up with a better one. I'm not saying that the system is perfect. I'm just saying that these are difficult, complex family issues. And no matter what system the court puts in place, it's going to be some form of kind of a cookie cutter system that they're going to try to use to apply to all of the cases. And every single case is nuanced and a little different because we're human beings and we're all different. So this cookie cutter system isn't going to fit every single family. But unfortunately, there has to be some form of process to move the cases through the system. You have to understand that the court's perception around these issues is very different from yours. And you have to understand that in the first instance, the court's job is to protect the children if they think that there is any risk at all to them. So that's where they're going to start. But usually what will happen is as that case moves through the system, and the court's able to gather more and more information and data and involve experts and all the different things that happen through the course of a case. And also hearing from the parties and learning the details of what's going on, seeing the interaction between the parties, seeing the communication between the parties. As the judge moves through that and they start to gather more and more information just through like sitting with a case for a while, what will happen most of the time is over the long term, it'll find the spot it needs to be, right? It'll come out into the right type of situation most of the time over the long haul. It's usually in that very first instance that things are very disrupted, and to where there's certain things in place that cause it to not be fair or not be whatever negative word you want to put on it. But if we can look at it as, look, we've got to provide the information that the court needs to make the right decision over the long haul. And I think what most people do is they kind of get in this mindset where like they want to tell the judge, oh, you got it wrong. The system's wrong. And here's all the ways that you got it wrong. You have to kind of shift into, okay, this judge or this expert or whoever you're dealing with doesn't have enough information to understand the full picture, because they're deciding in a different way that I think is opposite of what the correct outcome is. So let me try to provide as much information as I can that's relevant, right? And this is where your attorney or or legal advice that you get from your attorney or a consulting attorney or whatever you're using comes into play of like understanding, okay, what is that information that the court needs to be able to make that kind of decision. Like if they're not making the decision in your favor right now and you think that's ridiculous, I've got all these things. Okay, what of those things is relevant? What isn't? And this comes into understanding what your judge's perspective is and what they're looking for versus what you think is relevant. When we're frustrated in these ways, a lot of times I have clients that say, I want to change this. I want to go against the system. I want to like file things and call people out and do appeals and motion for reconsideration. And I want that judge to know they got it wrong. And how do I get this recommendation thrown out or that recommendation thrown out and get it redone and all those types of things where they want to kind of point out all the errors that they feel are there in the system. And again, I think you have to take a step back because a lot of that can be emotionally driven for us. But what I always tell people is like, if you think the system's broken, I mean, first of all, you'd have to figure out a comprehensive way in which you're going to fix it or change it, right? And I think when you sit down and you start looking at that alone, it's daunting. It's like, I think a lot of us know that the system doesn't work perfectly. The problem is, what other system do you come up with that can create the type of thing that needs to come out of it? And I think that the very first issue is that it would take so much bandwidth. It would take so many hands and so much investigation and so deep that alone would be just financially impossible, and probably labor intensively impossible for the system because an outside person can't come in and learn everything there is to know about the entire history of our family from the start of it forward. That's just not a possible thing. So when we start talking about systematic issues, those are more like legislative, high level, governmental, types of things. And you can go that route and you can, sort of fight that legislative level, but understand that that is probably not going to come to fruition in time for it to impact your own custody case, right? It might save other people down the road. It might create situations where you're viewed poorly in your custody case and it could actually impact it more negatively. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that you keep your mouth shut to not make people angry. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is you do have to realize that there's trade-offs there. And so what I always tell people is like, if you're truly passionate about this and you think the system's broken and you really want to fix it, then what I would do if it was me, this is just my personal opinion, is I would wait till my children are out of the system. Then I would fight the legislation and say, look, I don't want this to continue to be the legislation for other families and other people moving forward. And that takes a mass movement, right? That takes more than just one individual. That takes a lot of momentum and a lot of people involved. And frankly, if you're focusing on that kind of momentum and gathering that type of power, you're probably not real focused on your own custody situation. It's going to take time away from that and from your kids, from your parenting, all of those things. So in the meantime, you're still trying to parent, you're trying to be present for your kids, you're trying to work and support and provide for everybody or whatever that looks like. You're trying to have some kind of life. Okay, so recognize that fighting the system on that level is going to add a whole nother layer of stuff to it that honestly is going to take your focus off of your child and probably cause you to not be able to do as well for your own child, but you will have more effect for future, for other people's children and all that kind of thing. So it's a trade-off. It's very hard to do both of those things at one time. Can we do things to change it long-term and whatever? Sure. But that's going to be, like I said, a very long-term project. And in the short term, you're still standing in that courtroom with that judge, today, next week, next month, next year, and trying to figure out how do you make this system work in the way that you need it to? You have to understand how the court's perspective is different from yours. And the reason the perspective is different is because the court isn't coming at this from a parenting perspective. They're coming at it from the legal definitions, that the legal code in your state that they are bound by around custody issues. And when you start to understand that and you go out and you start educating yourself and reading those codes and understanding that when we elect officials, this is what we're electing them to do, to enforce the law, right? It's much like a police officer. A police officer might not agree that a certain road is dangerous and that you should be able to drive 75 on that road or whatever. But they can't unilaterally make that decision based on, the time of day, the amount of traffic, the car you're driving, the kind of tires you have on, the level of experience of driver you are, right? There's all these factors that come into play that may warrant you being able to drive faster on that road. But at the end of the day, the police officer has to enforce the speed limit. And you have to understand that your judge, they're elected, and their job is to enforce those family codes and those, laws. And so if you don't even understand what those family codes are, and you're thinking, well, I'm an experienced driver and I have this car and these tires and there was no traffic and there was no bad weather and and I should be able to drive at this speed. And you apply that to your custody case and say, well, all of these things, I should be able to parent the way I want to parent. It can feel really frustrating, but at the end of the day, that's not what the judge is there to do, to let you parent the way you want to parent. They're there to enforce those codes. I know this can be really frustrating, but this is something that you can navigate and you can learn to do well, despite the fact that we're in an imperfect system. There are ways when you start to understand it and educate yourself. And that is the key to the whole thing to me, is you educating yourself and understanding this system, how it functions, why it functions that way, and how you can best advocate for yourself. So if you'd like more help in learning those things and sorting through those issues, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's information on that page on my group coaching programs for moms and dads and my premium one-on-one VIP coaching services. Okay. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you guys next week.